Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome or welcome back if you are rejoining us for this session. My name is Dalibor Petrovic. I'm a partner at Deloitte. And over the last number of years, I've had the pleasure of hosting this series of live webcasts that are primarily intended for Canadian tech leadership and tech enthusiasts audiences. We are delivering different series on different topics that we feel are important and timely. And today, we are going to have episode 2 in our ongoing series on cloud computing that we call Cresting the Cloud Horizon. So for you who've been following us on this channel in the past, you would know that our first episode early in March, we talked about cloud and FinOps as a new best practice emerging on how to actually approach and manage financial aspects of cloud computing. Today, on this fine April the 2nd, 2024, we are going to be unpacking the art of multi-cloud. And then towards the end of April, on the 30th, we'll talk about cloud adoption and translating it into actual business value. And on a fourth episode, May 28th, we'll talk about Cloud Models Blueprint for acceleration of cloud transformations. Today is going to be a very, very interesting topic. If I do a quick sort of reflection parallel, about 15 years ago, I decided to sort of cut the proverbial umbilical cord, and I cut my cable subscription as a revolt when I saw the bill that was exceeding $150 a month. And I went to something cool and interesting and new called Netflix, and suddenly my options of watching TV it suddenly became sort of much more autonomous and much more under my control for what seemed to be a fraction of the cost. And then a couple of years later, of course, Amazon Prime comes with their solution, and of course I subscribe to that, and then Crave, and then Disney Plus, and fast forward now 15 years later, I operate multiple subscriptions to these cloud services. And is it better? Yes, but it is also much more complex. There are certainly overlaps, and it turns out it's a little bit more expensive than where I started. So we know that many enterprises, many organizations faced a sort of similar sort of business version of this story. This is something we refer to as the multi-cloud. And today, I'm going to be joined by two of my friends and colleagues to unpack this current trend and this circumstance. So I'm very thrilled to be joined by Divya Bharti. Divya is a leader of Deloitte's cloud engineering practice. Divya, thank you very much for finding time to be with us. And we are now joined by Simo Vujovic, a partner leader at Deloitte, leading our cloud engineering practice. And these two experts are going to help us unpack the art of the multi-cloud. Before we start, I'd like to just remind our audience that this is a live session, which means first, pardon any technical glitches that may happen. And second, this gives you a chance to engage in the conversation. So if you have any questions, comments, reflections, please use our Q&A function of this Zoom platform and submit your questions, and we do our best to address as many questions as we can. And with that, Divya, I'd like to actually start with you to help us understand what is it that we mean when we say multi-cloud. And maybe before we start, if you can just maybe do a couple of minutes of your quick intro.
Sure, thanks, Dalibor. I'm Divya Bharti. I'm a director in Deloitte Canada, and I lead Deloitte Canada's cloud strategy practice. I've been helping clients since the last 20 years with their technology transformations, and over the last 10 years specifically with their cloud transformation journeys. And, Dalibor, the story that you shared with me kind of is inspiring me to share a story as well here. So if I think about, we've really come a long way from, I'm talking about 2004 when I started my career, and clients having data centers in their basements. So this is our first year of my job, and my client was a North American client, and the data center was in the client's basement, and the basement got flooded. And here I am getting my first-hand experience of disaster recovery. So we've come a long way from that time to then clients moving their workloads into co-location providers, actually sharing physical space with other clients, and to then moving into cloud. And today, now we are talking about clients having multiple clouds in their landscape. So that's where we are. And I think this gives us a good leeway to start to talk about what really is multi-cloud and how do we explain it. So I'd say if I define multi-cloud, it's not only having multiple cloud services across multiple cloud providers. The way I'd like to define multi-cloud is really the ecosystem of the hybrid multi-cloud, where clients have on-premises infrastructure. They also have something in maybe a private cloud. Some clients may have private cloud. They may have it self-managed. They may have it managed by a third-party provider. And then they have these multiple public cloud providers in the mix. So this entire ecosystem is in itself multi-cloud, or you could call it hybrid multi-cloud. And I'll quickly share a slide here while I'm talking about it to make it a little bit real.
I love this word that you use, ecosystem. The word ecosystem is going to be, I think, the word of 2024. I think ecosystem is popping up as a concept just in so many different areas of our business, from this now to how one thinks about partners and vendors, an extension of the IT organization in the world. So I love how you actually use that to describe this. It's a very, very, very good point. Sorry to cut you off. Please go ahead.
No, that's great. So if you look at the mini diagram right here on the right side of the slide here, that's the enterprise, and then we have the data center. Of course, not so much in clients' basements these days, which is a good thing. But then the data center and the private cloud, and then you can look at the multiple cloud providers, AWS, GCP, Azure, and other hyperscalers, which are the public cloud service providers. And the client is essentially using any and all kinds of services, including infrastructure as a service or platform as a service, or even SaaS solutions from these multiple cloud providers. And this entire ecosystem is what we would like to call as multi-cloud or hybrid multi-cloud.
So go ahead.
So I think you also asked about, in today's landscape, if you think about multi-cloud, if you look at organizations today, I would say that almost every organization does have multi-cloud in their landscape. So the way I like to define it as how have organizations attained multi-cloud? They have either attained it by default, or they have attained it by design or by choice. So what do I mean by default really is, different departments or business units or teams in organizations, they are playing around with cloud. They are doing some POCs. They are migrating some workloads to different cloud providers. And by virtue of doing this, they actually already have workloads in multiple cloud service providers, and organizations just find themselves in multi-cloud. So they did not have like a coordinated strategy by virtue of which they reached this place, but they just reached this place by virtue of the departments and teams dabbling and playing with different multiple cloud providers. That's what I call as being in multi-cloud by default. And I'd say most organizations are in multi-cloud by default. And then the other sort of way for multi-cloud is being in multi-cloud by design or by choice, which means that the organizations have a well-defined cloud strategy that's thought through. And now by means of intention, they are deciding to have multiple clouds. Now, when you have intention, you have choice, right? So organizations can then decide about, do they want to have the multiple clouds at the same level, which means that do they want to have the same level of guardrails, the same level of cloud landing zones built across these multiple cloud providers? Or do they want to have one cloud provider as a primary, and then the other one they would just use as a secondary cloud provider for specific use cases, for example, or very specific workloads? So they have that choice. So that's what I call as being there by design or by choice.
By design, by intent. So what I'm taking away is that pretty much every organization is in some form or fashion already in the multi-cloud environment. Many have just gotten themselves into it by backing into it. But we do have examples of clients who have been very strategic and intentional, right? Yeah. So this obviously has been going on for a while. This is not new. We are just calling this out now as we understand, of course, the complexities now require attention. So Simo, maybe what you can share with us is what are you observing would be some sort of notable trends in the market as it relates to multi-cloud? And Simo, given that this is your first sort of answer, I would love to if you could give us very, very quick sort of context of who you are and where you come from.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dalibor, and thanks for hosting us here today. Pleasure to talk about this, intriguing topic. I've been in the industry for more than 30 years now, and I hope I'm going to bring a perspective of someone who has seen this accordion of IT going back and forth from, centralized, decentralized, single cloud, multiple cloud, and I like your analogy with our TV content providers.
Yeah.
So what happened? Why multi-cloud? And before I start answering your question on trends, let's go back. A few years ago, March 2020, pandemic is upon us. The world is in a lockdown, and one of the consequences, intentional or unintentional, people are starting using cloud services more rapidly. Cloud had been with us since early 2010s. It wasn't new, but the fact that a lot of companies had to make fast decisions accelerated adoption of cloud. Well, accelerated adoption of a single cloud meant that companies were looking for solutions regardless where they existed. So as Divya pointed, intentionally or unintentionally, they ended up on multiple clouds. So what are the trends that we see now as they're looking at those solutions, whether it's by their choice or by default, that are happening? First, because now spend on cloud is bigger, so they started paying attention to it, why they're doing it. So the companies are now looking at, I want to have other options so that I improve my negotiating position.
Mm-hmm.
I do not want to be locked into single vendor, and it has to be in some form of a meaningful way so that the other provider, I'm going to keep them on their toes. Another trend is that what we see is that internal companies' policies for business continuity and resilience are looking for vendor concentration and looking from the risk perspective whether they're too concentrated. And just recently, we started seeing regulators, especially in financial services industry, watching the space and observing if, certain, especially large institutions have too much with the certain providers, and as such, are they susceptible to potential issues, as we know how important financial services are in our everyday life. So those are a couple of trends. Another one is that now that we have multiple SaaS offerings, we now see customers picking solutions not only from functional perspective, but also they're looking on non-functional requirements. Where is the SaaS provider hosted? Are they with a sound cyber posture? Because you can always infiltrate some bad habits through a bad service providers. So attention to those non-functional requirements are also leading customers to pick other cloud providers. And last but not the least, we see clients as they look at their value chain as their suppliers or customers that may either force or suggest and align certain solutions. Let's say in technology, you see automotive providers and their suppliers, they want to use compatible solutions to pass mechanical drawings. Or in logistics supply chain, significant providers and shippers of Amazon's products are more likely to be on AWS in order to ship with their platform. So they're, regardless of what your initial primary cloud provider may have been. So we see those different trends that are now impacting which cloud provider you may end up in addition to your original primary provider.
No, these are actually very, very interesting considerations, especially like the first few, I think were quite sort of intuitively obvious, right? That you want to avoid vendor lockdown and putting all your eggs into one basket. But this last one that you mentioned is actually quite intriguing to me, as it's harmonizing supply chain across your full sort of end-to-end, end-to-end, actually extended or harmonizing your cloud choices with choices made along your
by
partners in the ecosystem of your supply chain. That actually is an interesting new one to me. So thank you very much for bringing that one up. Yeah.
No problem.
So Dalibor, maybe now that we are talking about trends, I just want to add a little sneak peek into the
And of course, it's a live stream. And as Dalibor, as you mentioned, these things are going to happen.
There we go.
Divya is coming back.
Divya is back. There we go. Let's see if we can. So you want to share a screen, Divya? And you are on mute as well.
Thank you.
Better.
Going to share my screen and just provide a quick sneak peek into our cloud survey assessment report, Dalibor, that you mentioned. That's the next episode of the series where we are going to dig into all that we heard from our clients. But since we are talking about multi-cloud here, I just wanted to share this quick stat here that as part of our report, we have surveyed some 200 Canadian organizations. And as you can see, 75% of these organizations are already using more than one cloud service provider. So which means that 75% of the organizations are already multi-cloud. So that kind of attests to, what we were saying, that most organizations today are multi-cloud. And some are actually multi-cloud. They don't know about it because they are thinking that they only have the primary cloud service provider. They don't look under the hood of the SaaS solutions that they're using, because these SaaS solutions are also hosted on some cloud service providers, which may not be the same as the one that they're using. So by virtue of that, some of the organizations who may not even know that they are multi-cloud are actually multi-cloud. And then a few value drivers here are, if you look at the top three that organizations think why they need multi-cloud for, is around scalability for applications and data, and resiliency and reliability, which Simo talked about. And again, access to multiple cloud services, because it's a plethora of cloud services now available across all the different cloud service platforms. So those are like the top three that organizations have told us that they look for when they think multi-cloud.
Yeah, excellent. So Divya, can you maybe share with us some insights on how should organizations approach selecting multi-cloud providers for their environments? Like, is there a logic process that you can share?
Yeah, for sure. So I'd say when we talk about selecting the cloud service providers, there are actually two parts to it. So one is about when you think about multiple cloud, you have to think about, do you really need to be in multiple clouds? Do you really need an additional cloud service provider? That's the very first question, or the very first part that needs to be addressed. And if the answer to that is a yes, then the second part that comes is, what is really the selection criteria to choose this additional cloud service provider? Okay, so going back to the first part, do organizations really need a second or an additional cloud service provider? They need to think about, why do they need to be multi-cloud? Or what do they need this additional cloud for? What are they going to do with it, right? So they need to think about certain questions around, do they really need the additional redundancy for business continuity and disaster recovery goals, something that Simo talked about? Or are they looking to avoid vendor lock-in? Again, something that Simo talked about. Or are they looking to capture certain specific best of breed capability that is only available in this additional cloud? Or is there a specific use case or a specific SaaS solution that they're looking for? There are also sometimes some compliance considerations because of which organizations may want to go multi-cloud. So for example, Simo also mentioned this, that in financial services industries, for example, the latest, B10 guideline for OSFI, the way it is written, it kind of means that for disaster recovery, financial service organizations will have to think about having multiple clouds in the mix. So there could be some compliance considerations as well, because of which the organizations may have to think about going the multi-cloud route. So once they address all this, then the next question comes about how do they select the cloud service provider? And a lot of the things that they have already thought about in the while considering why they need an additional cloud service provider actually helps also in decisioning what this next cloud platform should be, along with a couple other important factors that I want to call out. One is talent. So this is something which is very important. We hear time and again from our clients that they don't have the right kind of talent in the organizations. So if they're thinking about going multi-cloud, they have to make sure that they have the right workforce. They have what it takes to actually manage and operate in the multi-cloud. That's one. The second very important consideration, I'd say, is the financial consideration. So sometimes clients are, they have bought multi-year commits from different cloud providers. So they're locked into these cloud providers. So they have to think about, what kind of commits they already have. They have to think about what are the discounts that these cloud providers are offering them. And they also have to think about some of the existing enterprise license agreements. Because sometimes, they have license agreements which do not translate very well to a specific cloud provider, and they do to some other cloud providers. So some of these considerations they have to think about when they're deciding what is the cloud platform they want to go next.
That's very good. That's pretty good, comprehensive. As Simo, anything to add? Any other factors you've seen play a role in organizations selecting, multiple providers?
Yeah, I agree with you. This was a very good and comprehensive set of reasons where to go. So let me add just a couple more things, more like a spice to a good meal. 7-8 years ago, we thought that the cloud battle was over, that there is a duopoly, AWS and Microsoft are there, and everybody's happy. Did we really need anything else? Sure enough, maybe customers didn't need, but Google didn't think like that. They wanted to make a strong entrance into it. And sure enough, from probably 2017-18, we see Google with their Google Cloud Platform really aggressively going after very specific either market segments or clients. It is notable their deal with the TELUS, which was marketed as $1 billion deal, where it really was specific client with a very specific way. And I should mention that one of the characteristics of that is that Google focused on helping those clients with the rapid move to the cloud by providing help. As we see, 10 years later after the cloud, still our major and largest corporations still have a lot of workloads that are not there, which then is another reason why our customers started looking beyond their initial cloud provider. There are a lot of cloud projects that didn't go as well or didn't yield the benefits that originally they intended to have. And now customers are open to hearing another story or a different provider and to say what would be their take on a specific situation that they have. So that we see yet as another reason to, in addition to all of these that Divya had mentioned, kind of which are really intentional and thoughtful, why it just happens because it's just a matter of fighting and competing in an IT environment. And last but not least, we see emergence of new technologies. Right now, we see Gen AI, and this is a new frontier where every cloud provider is trying to give that perfect environment to run those models for customers. And probably, 3 to 5 years from today, we are going to see quantum being another addition to that cloud. So I think that this space of cloud providers is not over, it's not done. And we will see emergence of new players there, which will, again, bring us to proliferation, addition of choices for clients.
Yeah, this is very good. This is very good. And I noticed you mentioned Gen AI. 24th minute into the conversation. So there is no live webcast anymore in 2024 when Gen AI doesn't come up. So there we go, thumbs up. I know from discussing this with my clients that one of the biggest challenge for organizations is really to figure out a way to decide and determine which workloads or which applications are best suited for what platform, right? So I would love to get some of your reflections on that. Maybe Divya, you can sort of get us going on that. How do organizations actually determine what workloads and applications are suited for what?
Sure. That's a very important question. And, this is something where we've seen clients get stuck because, they have now multiple clouds in the mix and they don't know which applications or which workloads to move to. So it's a very important decision, I'd say. So few important things, key things coming to my mind right now are latency, security, and data residency. Those are the three things that are I feel are very important. So we'll talk about them one by one. So latency. So if clients may have certain workloads or applications that absolutely require real-time responsiveness. Examples could be online gaming or even financial trading applications or video conferencing. So these applications do require like seamless user experience and real-time responsiveness. For such workloads, low latency workloads, clients may want to choose a cloud service platform that has data centers located closer to the end users. And we call it moving the workloads to the edge, right? So if they have, say, two cloud providers that they have in their landscape, they should think about which cloud provider has data centers closer to their target audience for such applications and such workloads and move those workloads to that particular cloud platform. The second one being security. So again, clients may have certain workloads that are that have sensitive data, PII, personally identifiable information, or that have certain compliance requirements. So an example could be workloads that handle healthcare data. They require HIPAA compliance. And so the organizations must think about which cloud service platform adheres to the HIPAA regulations for moving these kinds of workloads. So that's around security, because the healthcare organizations especially have to think about the patient data, and that has to be very secure, and privacy has to be top of mind for them. So they must make sure that the HIPAA regulations are taken care of. And then the third thing is around data residency. So which means data residency means storing data within specific geographical boundaries. And what comes to my mind really is the GDPR regulation from European Union, where all the data has to be within European Union's boundaries for all the European citizens. And if I talk about a comparative Canadian example, it would be the Canadian Federal Privacy Act, PIPEDA. I don't think I remember the full form here, but that act basically means that the Canadian organizations that are handling personally identifiable information have to make sure that the data stays within Canadian boundaries for all intents and purposes, that cannot go beyond Canadian boundaries, even for data processing. And I'm kind of emphasizing on this fact because we had a situation with a client where the client had a North American region in a particular cloud platform, but for certain specific workloads, we had to make sure and actually talk to the cloud service provider to make sure that if we use the Canadian region, the data is not going to be transported across the border, even for some of the high intensive processing that needed to be done on that data. So it's for Canadian Act, it's not just storage, but also processing. It has to be within the Canadian boundaries. So I feel like these are three very important considerations that I have seen, in my experience while placing workloads onto cloud providers' platforms.
Right.
Simo, would you like to add?
Yeah, no, a very comprehensive list, and I would just add to it. We also want to get a question a little bit more precise, which means, are we talking about adding new workload, as most of the cases that Diva was talking about, or are we thinking of sharing the same workload on multiple providers for the purpose of either resiliency or performance?
Okay, yeah.
This last one is probably the most difficult case and probably the one that we don't see that much. And there are a lot of skeptics out there that are saying that that's the reason why multi-cloud is more of a fad rather than reality, because we do not see the same workload in active being shared. And it's just a reality of the state of IT industry with different qualities of service that providers provided service with, or different data formats, whatever that might be. But that should not be the reason to eliminate that case as a potential target at some point in time. And we already see steps towards that ability to run a workload on different providers, whether that's emergence of Kubernetes service, which pretty much as such exists on every cloud provider. We also see providers of middleware like VMware or Red Hat that provide you services like Tanzu or OpenShift that would even make that Kubernetes service uniform over on every provider. So that could be another driver for multi-cloud adoption for the same workload on multiple clouds. And I wouldn't be surprised if large government institutions, for all good reasons, would also spread the workloads like that. And another one, in addition to all of those that Divya mentioned, is there are a class of workloads that require very low, call it qualities of service. You can run it whenever you can find the cheapest compute anywhere you can find it.
Yeah.
And could be some optimization workloads, could be some Monte Carlo simulations, whatever it is, like SETI that we used to run on laptops. So those type of workloads are also, good targets for multi-cloud environments.
That's very good. That's very good. We are receiving questions from our audience, and I think that this would be a good time to answer Vignesh's question. He's asking a little bit more information about data going out of the country in the context of security reasons. How is public cloud versus private cloud? How do they deal with it? Is private cloud better in this sense or not? Like any comments on that?
Yeah, so I think I go back to the case that I was talking about, the case in point with my client, right? And that was exactly what came up, where the client was very skeptical initially and wanted to keep those workloads on their private cloud itself in their data centers and not move those workloads to public cloud. And I think that's why we had this conversation with the public cloud provider, where we wanted to ensure that the data is not moving out of Canadian borders, even for processing. So that's definitely the case, that private cloud, you don't have to have the conversation, where it is, right? But for public cloud, you need to make sure and you need to have the conversation, which we had in the case of my client. And we were able to ensure that the public cloud provider told us that this is where the data is getting processed. Everything is within the Canadian borders, and we were able to migrate those applications.
And in this case, they actually ended up choosing public cloud with those assurances, yeah?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so in other words, it's possible, it's doable,
yeah,
manageable, right?
Yeah. So if I can, Dalibor,
please,
if I can just add to that, is a question of data placement, and sometimes becomes more of emotional or geopolitical rather than technological question.
Yeah.
Let's remind ourselves, cloud data centers are just that, data centers.
Yeah.
Very well run data centers and very well organized and documented, because all of the audits and regulations that are placed upon those cloud providers, I would say that the documentation on how they're run is much better than what most of the companies have themselves, which allows for better transparency and understanding what's actually happening with your data. Once we get over that emotional thing that somebody else may have some control over my data, which happens anyway, because a lot of customers don't own their own data centers, it's owned by somebody else. So there are a lot of ways how things can leak out. Once we get over that, then we should be really asking real questions of what are the controls that are in place, what responsibility I, as owner of the data, I have in that ecosystem, and and then based on that, decide what is the best place for my data.
Yeah. That is actually an excellent point. A gentle reminder that there is no cloud. It's not up in the sky. It's actually somebody else's very well run, hopefully, highly protected and secured, hopefully, data center, right? An important aspect for all of our clients to consider also is their readiness, right? Clients need to be ready for this multi-cloud environment. So I would love to ask if you could maybe share with us, Divya, what is the approach that we take in assessing readiness of organizations to make this move?
Yeah, sure. So I will, again, take this opportunity to share a slide here quick and a quick framework, as you know, Dalibor.
There we go.
We are not
consulting company, right? We, as a consulting firm, we always have a framework, and there has to be a quadrant somewhere as well, right?
Yeah. Okay, so this is the multi-cloud strategy framework. And to answer your question around readiness, Dalibor, the overall readiness really starts with diving into organizations' multi-cloud strategy and asking some intentional questions around what is the organization's overall cloud vision and where does multi-cloud fit within that? How does it enable the organization to achieve this enterprise cloud vision? And then really understanding what are the key drivers, why do you want to go multi-cloud, and what are the use cases that you want to achieve by having another cloud in the mix.
In the mix, yeah.
Right? Yeah. So that's like the basic questions that need to be asked. However, we do look at all these additional pillars to be very comprehensive in our approach. So I talked about the pillar on the top left, which is the core multi-cloud strategy, which I just talked about to understand the vision, key driving principles, etc. Then the second one on the right, I'll just go clockwise here.
Yeah.
So the second one on the right here is the multi-cloud decision framework. So this is what we just talked about in terms of how do you decide whether you want to go multi-cloud, and if you do, how do you decide what cloud platform should you be adding to your mix? So that's the multi-cloud decision framework that helps with that decision and finding out what cloud platform you should add as a secondary provider to your mix. The third one right there is multi-cloud design and architecture. So think about the design patterns or architecture patterns for workloads across multiple cloud platforms. That's a part of it. The other thing that you'd be thinking as part of the architecture would be what kind of security policies or security controls you would be putting in across the multiple clouds. And these have to be standardized policy controls across the multiple cloud environment. So all these key decisions related to design and architecture are as part of this particular pillar, I'd say.
Mm-hmm.
Moving down is the management and operations, which is all the tools and processes. And I think we've been talking about this as the meta cloud concept as well, which is about the single pane of glass and the cloud management platform across all the different multi-cloud providers. Yeah. That's what fits in here to manage and operate the multiple cloud providers that you have. Then the next one on the left is governance. Like, of course, if you put in all the process and technology, but you do not have governance, it's just going to fail. So governance is definitely a very important aspect. And when we think about multi-cloud, from an operating model perspective, we have to think about the entire hybrid multi-cloud ecosystem. It's not just across the multiple cloud providers, but the operating model is across the on-premises, private cloud, public cloud, whatever you have in your landscape. So that's what we need to think about in this dimension. The next one, of course, is cost. We have to think about the costs comprehensively. Again, it's not just in the public cloud providers. The costs have to be thought through across the entire landscape of what is costing you on-premise, what is costing you in the cloud. If you are moving workloads from on-premise to the cloud, you're shutting down servers, you're decommissioning servers, so on and so forth. So that's about the cloud financial management. So these are like the 6 different pillars that we look into when we think about a cloud strategy framework and whether a client is ready and how can we help them get ready to have multi-cloud.
Excellent. And Simo, are you able to share with us maybe one or two real-world example of this actually coming to life?
Yeah, absolutely. And we talked earlier, Divya mentioned earlier, these 2 cases where something was forced upon on you, and something that you pick yourself. And I'm going to have an example for both of those. So in one case, this is an insurance provider in the P&C space. They have selected the cloud provider for their core systems, and they have migrated off of mainframe legacy environment to their new core systems running on the cloud. All is good. Most of their microservices, they're adjacent to the core systems, are there as well. And then comes the need to do analytics and what to do with data. As we said, different cloud providers compete with different capabilities and qualities of service. So a different cloud provider came with a value proposition for data workloads that was so unique that although they had their core systems on one platform, they opted to go there to this different cloud provider for their data analytics. And their next workload in the contact center AI is going to be there as well. So that's a kind of a case where it was intentional, where they were thinking and make a selection based on qualities of service. And a different example is an airline. Early on in their existence, they selected a cloud provider as their homegrown applications. And at that point, their reservation system, which for every airline is heart and soul of an airline, a res system was running as a managed service provided in somebody else's data center as a service to them. It just happened so that several years later, that application provider for res system decided to go on the cloud. So now, without asking this airline whether they want it or not, they ended up on a cloud provider that's different from their primary provider.
Right.
So, and then how to deal with that, all of these discipline factors that Divya mentioned come into place to help you. How to think about data governance, how to think about integration platform, how to think about security across those, and operations in general.
Right.
Those are all important questions. One of the questions that I saw from our listeners was emerging international cloud providers like OVH. I would say that what Divya said, it pretty much answers that question, saying that you have to go through all of the good old disciplines. You visit people, process, technology, all of the sectors, and address everything from right architectural alignment, the right capabilities, and right processes in your operating model in order to effectively adopt that.
So from your experience working with clients, and I love that you brought these two stories, because this actually brings this concept in front of everybody's face. Both of these examples are actually very, very good to paint the picture of real situation that we find ourselves and our clients find themselves. What would you consider to be the biggest initial concerns and challenges when organizations are embarking on this journey of multi-cloud?
So what I've seen, again, real life from discussing with customers, a multitude of SaaS solutions. A large banking client in Canada has probably more than 100 different SaaS solutions, if not several hundreds.
Wow. And
then you start thinking about contractual arrangements that you have with those. Are they different or the same? Have you unified? Where are my data, both from the data provenance perspective, for data governance perspective, for running analytics? How you're going to deal with that?
Yeah.
Operations, SLAs, qualities of service that end users will have when a solution is composed from running multiple providers. So those are some of the key concerns and considerations that clients have, and they should be thinking about it, whether they got themselves into multi-cloud by choice, or if that was forced upon them.
Whether it was by their choice or somebody else's choice.
Indeed.
And so for those organizations that are on the journey, what would be the common sort of pitfalls and maybe misconceptions?
Yeah, that's a great question, Dalibor. So, and while Simo was talking about some of the vendor lock-in and some of those stuff, I was actually thinking in my head about some of this is actually it's a trade-off, or it's a misconception. So I'll talk about some of these things. So, for example, clients at times think that by virtue of adopting multi-cloud, they will have portability of workloads across these multiple cloud providers. And now they can just, whenever they are not vendor locked in, because they can just move their systems from one vendor to another. But the fact of the matter is that portability, first of all, it's not always optimal to have it, which Simo talked about. Like it takes a lot of effort to actually make your workloads portable if they are not inherently containerized, or if they're not inherently using the technology that is needed for being portable. So that's number one. Number two is that just by virtue of adopting multi-cloud, portability doesn't come. It needs a lot of careful planning at the outset to make sure that you are using the right kind of technology, the cloud agnostic solutions, automated deployment scripts, etc., so that you can get portability across the multiple cloud providers. So that was what I was thinking when we were talking about portability and vendor lock-in. That's definitely a misconception, and this leads to a pitfall, right? Because they think that they will get portability, but they do not unless they plan accordingly, right? Right. I think the other thing I'd like to point out here is sometimes clients also think that since we are going to multi-cloud, we have to have a tool for every cloud service provider to do a specific kind of work. Like we would need a cost management tool for every cloud service provider, for example. And it's true that all cloud service providers offer native tools for, similar sort of work across the cloud service providers, but then there are tools which are also agnostic. And if you are in a multi-cloud landscape, it's always better to use agnostic tools so that you could have that single pane of glass, for example, across the multiple cloud landscape. If you only have one cloud service provider, you should definitely use the native tool that cloud service provider offers. So that's the misconception where sometimes clients think, oh, I'll have to use so many different tools if I go and adopt multi-cloud. That's another thing.
Right. Simo, anything that you might add?
Yeah, one thing to add, and as technologists, we very quickly dive into technology and what's important, and we talked about it for a while. Let's step back a little bit and ensure that our technology choices are in line with our business strategy. It is always good to take time to ensure alignment of your technology strategy with business strategy, because you're going to come into a situation where you have to make decisions and choices, and if there is no clarity which one is more important, then you start sub-optimizing and losing time and not making the right decisions. Is it expansion more important? Are we in a cost-cutting space, or are we in acquisition of new customers? Those business strategy and business imperatives are going to drive some of your choices for your cloud providers and workload placement.
100%, yeah. And I think when you talk about cost here, Simo, are you in a cost-cutting state, right? Sometimes this is another myth that sometimes clients think that by virtue of adopting multi-cloud, they'll actually be able to reduce costs. So the myth here is that although they might have access to competitive pricing now that they have two cloud providers in their mix, yes, they can, maybe negotiate better. They are in a better bargaining position, maybe. But, also think about the area and the perimeter that now you have for infrastructure spinning and for, the something that you need to secure. Your perimeter that you need to secure is much more than what it was before. So you need to put in more cost there to be able to secure that perimeter, to be able to make sure that the same security controls, policies, standards are put across the different multiple cloud providers. So I think cost cutting is not really something that a client should go in to multi-cloud thinking that this will help me cut costs.
Shouldn't be the primary driver for the decision.
Yes, exactly.
Right? It shouldn't be the primary. So let's then talk about what those benefits actually are. So if direct cost saving should not be the primary driver, what are those key benefits of clients actually being in multi-cloud environments?
Yeah, and I think, again, I draw inspiration from what Simo just said about alignment with business strategy.
Yeah.
I feel like one of the very important benefits of being in multi-cloud environment is the business agility that the businesses get and the choice that they get, because they now have access to the latest technology and the best of breed cloud services across different cloud providers. So they have a plethora of things to choose from, right? And then also they have a lot of innovative tools and products available. So they can innovate at scale by using all these cloud services that are available to them. And when I think about innovation, I actually also think about the AI/ML models. So nowadays, a lot of cloud service providers have trained AI/ML models. They call it LLMs, or large language models, for specific use cases. And you could choose from what LLM, which is already trained AI model, you want to use for a specific use case. So it kind of gives you that agility from a business perspective. So, I mean, that's kind of the top of mind benefit for me right now when I think about multi-cloud.
Yeah, absolutely. Simo, anything to add?
I would add just that your capability to run in multiple environments in the right way is going to further sharpen your capabilities in running either or any of those cloud environments. You're going to be forced to look at your operating model and understand what is the optimal way to do it. So it's going to think about it like today in athletes, when they practice for one sport, they don't just play that sport. They're advised to go and train different muscles, because preparing those muscles is going to increase your capability in your prime sport. Similar here, as you're on multi-cloud and as you are sharpening your capabilities in cybersecurity, sharpening your capabilities in interoperability and integration, is going to up that level where you're already at. And I think that's very important. Because as we said, inevitably you will be there. So might as well start working on different muscles and train them for that.
And you might as well actually approach it intentionally, right? That's the message. Think about this in an intentional way. Don't let yourself be backed into the circumstance that you need to now navigate out of.
Right.
Grab a hold of your destiny and intentionally drive this.
Yeah.
That's I think a very, very clear message that's coming out. There was of course a question on cost. So I would love to ask for your perspectives on how do organizations effectively manage cloud costs in this multi-cloud environment? Are there any specific strategies you can share with us, or are there any good tools you come across? And let's peek into that. This is very important, of course, especially sort of nowadays.
Absolutely.
I'd love to get your reflections on that topic.
Yeah. Do you mind if I start, Simo?
Sure, please.
Go ahead.
Okay. So if I think about cost, I think about monitoring what you're doing in the cloud, reporting on that, and then managing that, right? So three things is how I think about cost management. So when I say monitoring, it's about looking into the usage of cloud resources across all the multiple cloud platforms. And there might be some idle or underutilized resources that you can look at and identify areas of inefficiencies or places where you are spending more than what you should have been spending, right? So monitoring the usage is very important. The next thing is about reporting, because of course, not just monitoring, but unless you are reporting what you're monitoring, nobody knows what's happening there, right? So centralized reporting across the different cloud providers is very important. And then the third thing was management. So here is where I want to talk a little bit about the cloud cost management tools. So as I said, there are native tools that every cloud service provider offers. But since we are talking about multi-cloud, we should talk about tools that go across cloud service providers. So tools like, Aptio Cloudability, for example, is one of the tools that can go across all the different multiple cloud providers. And the good thing about these tools is that these tools offer features such as cost tracking, budgeting, and even go up to the extent of providing cost optimization recommendations, which comes in very handy. And once you have those recommendations and you do the proper reporting, then you can go ahead and actually act on those recommendations and save costs there. So I think these are the three things which come to my mind when I think about cost management.
Excellent, excellent. Simo, anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I would add that while costs may increase, that we should be thinking about other value elements of why being on a cloud or multiple clouds. Similar to the fact that, yes, I can drive to New York City from Toronto, where I am, but if I need to be there in a couple hours, I probably wouldn't choose that.
Yeah.
So, both offer me ability to get there, and then one is, maybe higher cost. But if I need to be there in 2 hours, I'm not going to choose to drive. Same here. There are certain capabilities that a business is going to require in a certain time or at a certain pace, that having additional cloud provider is just going to be beneficial to do it.
Yeah.
And what we were talking about earlier is how to ensure that those costs are not out of control and they're not higher than they should be. So I think that there are a lot of good reasons and other elements why you should go there, other than necessarily and only cost being number one.
Yeah. So what I would extract from that is we need to flip the conversation from cost conversation to value conversation. And that has to be sort of the prism through which we look at costs. Is increased cost going to result in even further increased value we're going to get? And is that really what is needed by the business? We did get another question on this particular topic. And it's actually not a technical question. It's more of a question: how do you approach and prepare business leaders who might actually not be tech savvy? This inevitable increase in operating costs that cloud environments drive. Obviously, we are moving from capital costs to operating costs. And specifically, sort of, how would you approach an executive who is used on having, systems on premise that eventually get fully amortized and can be perceived as being now free, right? And any sort of reflections, experiences there that you could share, Simo and Divya?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, coming back to understanding our business objectives, and then to see how can technology facilitate achieving those business objectives, and what are our options that are there. And I would start from there and see what are the best options. Now, what are the costs? And at the end, it's going to just be a part of that equation, part of the value equation. So we're coming back to the previous point that you made, is that expand the notion of value beyond just cost.
Cost, exactly.
Because it is there for every business that may be growing or competing in some shape. There are other elements other than cost. And even technology that's perceived to be free, fully amortized, it's only for a period of time. Let's not forget the technical indebtedness.
Of course.
And like any debt, technical debt is very bad. So you certainly, as a growing business or business that's competing in an ecosystem, as we mentioned earlier, you do not want to live with technical debt. Like you don't want to live with financial debt.
Yeah. Wonderful. Divya, anything in closing? Any final remarks in closing, Divya?
Yeah, so I just add one more thing to the question that you asked, Dalibor. I think nowadays organizations are thinking about unit costs, and that kind of gives a very good handle into yes, we have these many cloud resources, but then what is the revenue that we are making, for example, and what's the unit cost of these cloud resources? So the conversation is already flipping from a cost conversation to a value conversation. And we've started to have these conversations with some clients a couple of years ago. And I think you also talked about this in our previous episode. So if any of the viewers want to get a little bit deeper take on the unit costs, I'd tell them to go watch the previous episode.
Go watch the previous episode on FinOps. Thank you
Yes.
very much. Thank you very much, Divya. Thank you very much, Simo. And thank you to all of our audience members for staying to listen to this very, very important and timely conversation. I would like to invite you to join us back for the episode 3 on April 30th. Of course, you will be properly invited with my email that you should be accustomed to now. And I want to also highlight that tomorrow on April the 3rd, we'll go into the tech trends conversation. We'll be unpacking tech trend number 4, which talks about DevX, developer experience. A new philosophy where we are observing leading organizations putting in place both systems and methods and tools to create an environment that will be so conducive for their best technical experts, their developers, their architects, their engineers, to not just hire them, but to retain them and allow them to thrive. So we'll be unpacking that tomorrow, same channel at noon Eastern. Please plan to join us. And with that, Divya and Simo, thank you so very much. It was a pleasure to listen to you and learn from you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Dalibor.
Thanks for having us. Bye-bye.
Bye.